And here we are today. Bible history, and we're in the 10th of 11 periods, the life of Christ. So we're in the Gospels. I didn't get it squeezed in last time, so I want you to go back with me. Go to Matthew 26, and I want to pick up and give you and number the trials of Christ, for there were half a dozen of them, my word. So we're looking at Matthew 26, and if you have a little space in the margin or someplace in your Bible, just before Matthew 26:57. The first trial is not in Matthew. And so it was number one before Annas, the high priest. And that's John 18:12-16. John 18:12-16. That's the first trial. Now, verse 57 in Matthew, it's Caiaphas, and that's trial number 2. Now we're to chapter 27. He's before the priests and the elders. This is the third trial of Jesus. The fourth is in verse 2 and carries over to verse 11. That's where it picks it up again. It's the fourth trial, and underline in verse 2, Pilate is before Pilate. The fifth trial is not in Matthew's gospel. So after verse 14 in Matthew 27:14, right in fifth trial, Herod, and that's in Luke 23:6-12. And then he's back before Pilate again, twice before Pilate. Chapter 27, verse 15, underline governor. That's Pilate, and it's the sixth trial. Oh my, what an ordeal to go through. So now we're in Mark, and we're going to move today. So fasten your seatbelt, and let's see how well we can do here. We're in Mark, and Mark is the shortest gospel, and it's the fastest. So if you like fast food, you like Mark. This is the fast gospel. The key word which pops up in the King James, immediately and straightway. Those are the key words. And both of those words are a translation of the same Greek word, and those are good translations. Immediately. 41 times. When I give counts of words, they're usually from the Greek, and then we have it nailed down for sure. 41 times in the Greek text of Mark. Straightway, immediately, right now, whatever you translate it. Now, 606 of the 661 verses in Mark are also in Matthew. Not much new in Mark. 92% of what's in Mark is also in Matthew. And 350 verses of Mark appear in Luke. And there are only 31 verses in Mark that don't appear in another gospel. The key verse in Mark is 10:45. The Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life. Christ is portrayed as the king in Matthew, but in Mark, it's Christ the servant. He came not to be served, but to serve. And so there we have that. Now then, we go quickly through Mark, and we're not going to linger with it because a lot of this material is covered in Matthew. But we're going to chapter 11. Chapter 11 is Jesus entering Jerusalem. It's Palm Sunday. And actually, here you have it. He's entering. He drew near, it says, to Jerusalem and Bethphage and so on. So 37%. Notice how the emphasis in all the Gospels falls on that last week. Important. That's what's important. Palm Sunday through Resurrection Sunday, Easter. So 37% of Mark is just covering 1 week, the last week there before the resurrection. Now, with that, we're going to go over to Luke. And so we did the trials of Jesus. We went fast through Mark's fast gospel. And now we're in Luke. Luke is interesting because of the 4 Gospels, this is the only one written by a Gentile. Also, it's the only one written by a medical doctor. Luke was a physician. Now, and that's going to pop up. We'll talk a little more about that. But remember, Matthew, Christ the King. Mark, Christ the servant. Luke, Christ the Son of Man, a heavy emphasis on his humanity. So we're going into Luke now. There's a little phrase, I think in most of the other translations, sometimes it's not just translated and gets lost, but you find in the King James, and it came to pass, and it came to pass, and it came to pass. It's sort of a extended conjunction, a transitional phrase. It appears 48 times. I'm counting from the Greek again. And it came to pass is a translation of one Greek word. 48 times it appears in Luke. So we have it there. Now, the key verse, since the emphasis is on the Son of Man, is Luke 19:10. The Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which is lost. Now, Luke was a physician. He's given us 2 books, the Gospel and then the book of Acts that we're going to get to in our last period of biblical history. And he starts out, chapter 1, inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things. This is a borrow. It's the same kind of introduction that the father of medicine, the Greek Hippocrates, had to starting his medical treatise. And as you read through Luke, and especially you folk who are in the medical field, Luke should be a favorite to you. And you want to pick up the things that a physician picks up. When we come to Peter's mother-in-law who has a fever, Luke notes it's a high fever. When he comes to a man who has leprosy, he notes he's full of leprosy. In other words, a bad case, not easily cured, but he was. And then when he talks about a camel going through a needle's eye, the word needle is the specific Greek word for a physician's needle. And notice again and again, it's the right hand that was withered. His picking up on what's exact. We had one of our kids in the hospital. My wife was there at the time of surgery, and the general practitioner came out and said, now, on what side was that hernia? She said, I think it was the right side. And he said, well, if it wasn't, we'll do both. Oh my. So the right side. And when Peter takes off the ear of the high priest's servant, Luke says, it's the right ear. All those little medical notes and great drops of blood. And it's the Greek word in the original for thrombosis. So you have a whole string of these medical notations that you pick up as the physician Luke writes his gospel. Now, we're not going to go through it chapter by chapter, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a list of incidences that appear in Luke that don't appear in Matthew or Mark or John. These are Luke only. Luke only. Well, the first two chapters are Luke only. Chapter 1 about Zacharias and Elizabeth, who are the parents of John the Baptist. That's not in any other gospel. And Zacharias' experience in the temple, and then the birth of John the Baptist. That's Luke. That's the first chapter only. And then in the first chapter also, the Annunciation to Mary, the angel coming and telling her she's going to have a child and all of that. And then chapter 2, so here's the humanity of Christ. Luke, theme, Son of Man. Chapter 2 is the record of the birth. Bethlehem, unto you is born this day a Savior who's Christ the Lord. And the shepherds and all of that. And then Jesus' presentation at the temple. Notice I said Jesus. In the English language, I'm the grammar teacher now. When a word ends in S and is a possessive, you don't say Jesus's. No. You were sleeping in the 4th grade or wherever that came up. Jesus with an apostrophe, no extra S on it, no. And same with Moses. It's not Moses's, no, it's Moses. And when you write it with an apostrophe. So we have the first 2 chapters are Luke only. Zacharias, Elizabeth, the birth of John the Baptist, the birth of Jesus. And then at the end of chapter 2, the boy Jesus at 12 years old up to the temple. And that little narrative there comes. Now in chapter 3, you have, it's interesting, you're on to John the Baptist. And then at the end of that chapter, you have the genealogy. But this doesn't appear in any other. Now, the genealogy in Matthew is that of Joseph. Here, the one here starting in chapter 3, verse 23, where it says Jesus is 30 years old. That's when his ministry begins. And then comes the genealogy. That's Mary's genealogy that appears here. So it's different. And that's Luke only again. So then chapter 4 is that incident in the synagogue in Nazareth, where they try to really kill Jesus. It's the first attempt on his life. That's chapter 4, and that's Luke only. Now we're still on this list of Luke only incidents. And chapter 7 is the widow's son at Nain being carried out by the pallbearers, dead, to the cemetery. Jesus breaks up the funeral procession and raises the boy from the dead and returns him to his widowed mother. Chapter 8, you have an interesting little item at the beginning. You wonder, here are 12 apostles in Jesus, 3 years, no visible means of support. The fishermen have quit their fishing. Matthew has quit his tax collecting. And Jesus has quit his carpenter shop in Nazareth. What on earth did they live on? Well, there was a support group. You read the opening verses of Luke 8, some women, and some of them wealthy, who paid for them, washed their clothes, cooked for them, and took care. This is the culinary support group for Jesus and his disciples. And can you begin to imagine the 13 young men, hungry, living in the out of doors, how much food they consumed? Luke chapter 8, and that's the only place where that story is told. Chapter 10, the Good Samaritan, familiar. Chapter 11, teaching on prayer. Chapter 12, the rich fool, this night your soul is required of you. 14 is on discipleship. That's not in any other gospel. Chapter 15, usually people say, Bible teachers say, you have 3 parables here. The lost sheep, the lost silver, the lost son. Jesus says it's one parable with 3 parts. He says he spoke a parable to them. And chapter 16 is about money. And chapter 17, the 10 lepers, only one returning to give thanks. 18 is about prayer. 11 and 18, prayer. The unjust judge. And then, of course, chapter 19 is Zacchaeus and Jericho. Amazing. All these people. And Jesus knew his name, looks up in the tree and says, Zacchaeus, come down. And he knows your name too. Jesus knows our names. Chapter 23 is the trial before Herod. And that's Luke only. Then in chapter 24, an incident that Mark covers in 2 verses, covers most of chapter 24. The resurrection day and Jesus appearing with those 2 disciples who are checking out and going back home to Emmaus, and he reveals himself to them. So here you have a list of all the items that are in Luke only. And for next time, read John's gospel. We'll open it up for you. But read it carefully. It's different from the first 3 that we call the synoptics. John's gospel, next time.